It is Tuesday night, and I did make mention of the fact that we got a really hot one tonight. Let me welcome Servaas du Plessis. Before establishing XTND, Servaas was Chief Executive Officer of the First Rand Short-Term Insurance Administration and Summit Insurance Administration Services in the First Rand Group. Servaas has 40 years of experience in combating white-collar and organized crime. He joined the financial services sector in 1995 after resigning as commander of an organized crime division of SAPS and specializing in uncovering criminal activities of foreign syndicates operating in South Africa. Servaas is, amongst others, a certified fraud examiner. He was named the Worldwide Who's Who Executive of the Year in Insurance Crime and Fraud Prevention in 2013 and the winner of the Africa CEO Today Award in the category Fraud Risk Prevention in 2020. He co-founded the South African Insurance Crime Bureau and is the past president of the South African chapter of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. Hey, Servaas, good evening, welcome. How are you? So many medals.
Good evening. Good evening, Tich. No, it's going well on my side. Glad to have this opportunity to speak to you.
Yeah, same here. Hope you enjoyed your holiday today.
Yeah, it was a pleasant day.
All right, I want to start off with, the biggest elephant in the room. This Masemola case is being called the textbook case of procurement failure. Tell me about that.
Yeah, Tich, if you look at what has been happening over the last probably more than a decade, you will see and notice that this is really a situation that mirrors the standard procurement fraud pattern almost exactly to the T. You have a concentration in decision making, you have manipulated tender process, high value award under questionable circumstances, and money flowing before the proper scrutiny or verified delivery is confirmed. So these are not subtle warning signs, they are classic red flags we keep seeing in procurement failures across state and private sector.
Servaas, how does crime get to the very top of what should be the policing agency of the country? I mean, look at the National Commission of the South African Police being involved in tenders, to the value of $360 million. How does a state or a nation get to that level?
Procurement risk really becomes systemic when the breakdown appears across different organizations and sectors. And the police is definitely not the first state entity where we've seen this. You see the recurring weaknesses in due diligence processing, in the tender design, conflict management, the monitoring of the contract, and as we saw with the announcement of Mr. Masemola, the tone from the top that really sets what the division or the organization or the department in the government is going to be like from the top down. The lesson that we learn is that, fraud thrives not because the controls are absent, it's because the culture surrounding it allow those controls to be bypassed.
Okay, so it's people learning how to bypass certain systematic controls. But what is important is how can we begin to look out for the basic red flags?
So it's actually not a very scientific decision. The red flags are not missed; they are just invisible. The people that is charged with controlling the environment, are not really looking for the weaknesses, and the culture really discourages any scrutiny. So when leaders prioritize speed or outcomes over process, people stop asking hard questions. And, the basic checks become tick box exercises, conflict of interests are tolerated, and the obvious and normal anomalies are just viewed and dismissed instead of investigated and addressed.
Yeah, there was a 50 rand paid out before the Medicare 24 contract was halted. What does that tell you about controls, afterward versus controls before? Should we have serious controls before, or should we then have follow-up controls after the money has been paid?
You should actually have the controls pre the tender submission, during the tender process, and before any money is paid. So it tells me that the entire control chain has failed. Pre-award controls should test whether the vendor, the process, and approvals are sound. And the post-award control should ensure that no money moves unless deliverables are verified and payments are justified. So if 50 million can go out before intervention, then
Yeah,
post-award oversight is clearly not going to be strong enough.
yeah. So if corporate leaders are watching us, listening to us tonight, what is the first question their board or audit committee should be asking today to make sure that we clamp down on this pilferage?
I think the first question is straightforward, but obviously uncomfortable. Could this happen in my organization or in our organization? Because that really forces boards and audit committees to stop treating these cases as somebody else's scandal and really start testing whether they have the same weaknesses in vendor vetting, in tender governance, contract oversight, and leadership accountability. Um,
Mm, mm,
these discussions normally do not reach the boardrooms, and although we've just gone through the process of clearing ourselves to get off the grey list. But if business and government are not going to focus on these tender and manipulation of bids,
mm.
it's not going to keep us off the grey list for very long.
Yeah, yeah. So it really begins with the tender process, yes? So there are tender specifications, and they often favor one bidder, don't they? So how can we begin to correct the process?
I think the most important in the process, obviously, independence. You must engineer independence into the process in each and every step of the process.
Mm,
That means separating the duties, rotating committee members, enforcing conflict of interest declarations, and making sure that no single person can shape specification, evaluate bids, or influence final approval. Once a
yeah,
committee becomes predictable or compromised, the process can be steered very easily.
yeah. Mm, mm. So one of the things I think you want to be able to deal with at this time is data and data analytics. And with everything that you've learned in these past few years, what is the immediate course of redirecting and readdressing tenders in the country?
So, I think, there's a saying that fraud is not a victimless crime. It normally
Mm,
looks like an activity against a big corporate with deep pockets and large bank accounts, but essentially it's the person on the ground who suffers the most. So the
yeah.
money
Mm,
is taken away from essential services in the case of the police, and it never gets employed where the money would make a difference. So finance teams should really track anomalies between the contract terms, the invoicing, and the actual
mm,
delivery. The
mm,
key indicators are large early payments, invoices that's not tied to a verified milestone, repeated round number payments, like the 50 million, the first payment that went out in this matter,
yeah.
and then
Mm,
also duplicate or split payments. We often also see that these perpetrators change banking details quite regularly, and the payment philosophy doesn't really match the project progress. So,
mm,
proper analytics in any financial or procurement solution will definitely surface the expectations before losses escalate.
Yeah, okay. One of the things you said was the fact that we're actually stealing from the ordinary people. And sometimes it's the ordinary people that alert us to some of these anomalies. Whistleblowers uncover many major fraud cases. What makes a whistleblowing channel actually safe and effective today?
We're fortunate in South Africa that there is a whistleblowing legislation, the Protective Disclosure Act. Currently, it only protects employees of organizations, but there is a draft by government to expand it to everybody that blows the whistle.
Mm,
The whistleblowing line or application or channel should genuinely be anonymous, easy to use, and it should be backed up by visible protection against retaliation. I think the real test is trust. People must believe reports will be taken seriously, investigated independently, and acted on.
yeah. Mm,
If people fear consequences more than they trust the process, whistleblowing channel will fail.
mm, mm. Yeah. But do you think that government and the security system is doing enough to protect whistleblowers?
I don't think you can ever do enough to, protect whistleblowers. Sometimes whistleblowers are their own biggest enemies as well. Boasting
Mm,
about someone that they brought down because they blew the whistle, and the story,
mm,
very quickly escalates and spirals out of control. But it takes a person with guts to blow the whistle.
mm.
And as I say, they are busy in the country working on legislation to protect whistleblowers a bit more. Unfortunately, we've seen over the last few years quite a few whistleblowers that unfortunately demised because of reports that they submitted against high-ranking officials and senior business people.
Mm.
So I
S-
don't think you can ever do enough to protect whistleblowers. Um,
mm.
But I think if you can at least secure their anonymity, it will help them to fly under the radar. If they don't go boasting about what they've
Yeah.
done or who they've exposed, there shouldn't
Mm.
be risk or consequences for them.
Yeah, they do that sometimes, after two or three drinks by the bar, they tend to say a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things, Service, you've been talking about is integrity. So, integrity assessment for leadership appointments. What should that process include that most organizations overlook?
If you look at most organizations, you go through receiving a CV, you assess the credentials, you look at experience, you do follow-up calls to references on the CV. But there's very, very seldom that a company or a department uh, dives a bit deeper into the integrity. Um, Integrity reviews should be stock standard and include reputational screening, conflict of interest checks, unexplained wealth indicators, where appropriate,
Yeah.
obviously,
Mm.
past government's concerns, and a very sharp and a deep look at individual exercise judgment in previous roles. So senior appointments should attract more scrutiny, not less.
Yeah, you see, with people like you who really are there for the integrity of not just organizations but the country, I think it is important, for people to understand that this is um, an important project for everybody who's in South Africa. Oftentimes, people say technology should be applied as a solution. Do you think so?
Well, if you don't apply technology, you're definitely not going to go anywhere. I mean, we're in 2026.
Mm,
Technology is the only solution or the only assistance to people to scale. Technology is always consistent, and anomaly detection is standard. It doesn't have off days or holidays or having flu today, so I can't focus. And the technology can identify suspicious activities like payments, flagging conflicts, strengthening the contract monitoring far more efficiently than a person or a manual review can do alone. You obviously need human judgment. It's essential when assessing intent or interpreting context, challenging unusual decisions, and deciding whether a red flag is harmless or a sign of manipulation. But the key to the solution, or the key to solving the procurement challenges that we face, is definitely technology, because that strengthens your controls. And it doesn't replace accountability, but it makes it visible.
Yeah, so a lot of people argue and therefore say technology is expensive, so they resist the cost of improving controls. Do you think that is the right way forward? Prevention is indeed cheaper than cure, isn't it?
That is definitely so. So, when we speak to business people and they say, but we don't have budget for, our cybersecurity improvement
Mm,
or our
mm,
posture in terms of, ethics, the moment there's a failure, and the loss becomes measurable, that cost is
mm.
always higher than what it would have been if you just implemented prevention.
Yeah. Mm,
If you look at this case of Masemola, 50 million rand was lost before any intervention.
mm,
And that excludes the legal exposure, reputational damage, operational disruption, and the loss of trust in general in South African police.
mm.
Controls are not a drag on performance. They are protection against a much greater financial and strategic harm. And if it's going to cost you a few thousand to implement proper ethical standards and policies and processes in technology, you are going to, it's not going to be when, it's just going to be how much are you going to lose.
Yeah. Well, my similar case is indeed, a statement of how the system has fallen in South Africa. Do you think that sooner or later we'll get the systems and the controls back up and South Africa may be, back at the top again? How long do you think that will take?
I think it will take real guts and real will from setting the tone at the top, the highest echelons of government, the highest echelons of the private sector, because no one has to understand that bribery and corruption and fraud, forgery is not a one-sided affair, especially when it
Mm,
comes to corruption. There's always two parties involved. And as soon as they stop confusing urgency with permission to abandon process, then procurement integrity will return. And it's there for a reason, to protect both the organization and the individual decision maker. So I hope in my lifetime it will return. There's a
mm,
lot of good noises made. There's a lot of, exposure currently with the Madlanger Commission into the police corruption. And I've also, we on a daily basis, we see how more and more people are arrested and locked up. So hopefully this is the start of turning that wheel around to make sure that in future we deal with these matters disciplined and
yeah,
ethically.
yeah, yes. Thank you so much for joining me. Indeed, South Africa is the heart of the continent. We don't want to see it go to the dogs. And hey, we hope you guys can be able to get us back on top. Thank you, Servaas, our very, very important guest tonight on the Power Seat. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the First Rand Short Term Insurance Administration and Summit Insurance Administration Services as part of the First Rand Group. Good evening.